Hello, everyone. I know that everyone is currently on spring break. I hope everybody is doing something fun and enjoying the time off. You do not have to watch this video by any means, so if you have already clicked it and you've started watching, just keep in mind, I know you are on spring break. I, by all means, want you to absolutely enjoy it, or if you want to go ahead and work ahead and continue working on your assignments and listening to some of the lectures, then totally up to you. Just want to let you guys know that just because I am posting this does not mean you have to listen to it right now. But I do want to go ahead and go over a few things today. Two things that we're going to review today is going to be, one, what speech delivery is, and then also how to overcome speech anxiety. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. When you think about speech delivery, what do you think comes to mind? What do you think your speech delivery is? Speech delivery is anything and everything that anyone can observe about you while you are presenting, while you are giving a speech. What your hair looks like, what you are wearing, if you are, maybe you have like a nervous habit. Sometimes people put their hands in their pockets, or they don't know what to do with their hands, or they may twirl their hair while they're in front of an audience, cross their arms. There's all kinds of things. We're all different. We are all wired differently, so we respond differently. But whatever is made up of you that other people can observe, all of that, every little detail goes into what your overall speech delivery is. It's how you sound, what you look like, your tone, your facial expressions, every little thing that you do. All of that goes into the speech delivery, right? So in order to gain the trust from your audience, it is important that you focus on your overall speech delivery, because if you come across as insecure, or you are not confident, and you don't know your material, or anything like that, if you can't trust yourself, then that is going to show up. That is going to portray a certain amount of anxiety. And then your audience is also going to be able to observe that anxiety through what your speech delivery looks like. That is why, going back to intrapersonal communication, which we already talked about, why the intrapersonal communication is so important, because it all starts with you. Hopefully by now you are kind of seeing that it all kind of ties in together and you build upon it. And if you don't have a strong internal foundation for yourself, then it's like, this is your intrapersonal communication, and then you stack. But if this isn't solid, then it's going to kind of collapse, right? So in order to be an effective speaker and be a great speaker, you also have to have great speech delivery. And it takes time, so no pressure. Everything that we talk about and everything that we go over, this takes a lot of time, a lot of practice. It is not something that comes overnight to everyone. Sometimes it takes years for people to be able to master these skills. But whenever you are, say that you research a source to see if there is a credible source, there's a lot of variables that you look at. My background is in communication and public speaking. If I wrote an article about communication and it was an academic article that was published, that would be trustworthy. I almost have my PhD in communication. But if I was to write an article, I don't know, let's just say about cancer, I don't have a degree in medical. I don't have a background in medical. So that's probably not an article you want to read. But how you present yourself as a confident and assertive speaker is also going to dictate how your audience trusts you. And if you can't trust yourself and you can't be confident in how you show up, then your audience isn't going to be trustworthy of you either. So that is really important. Whenever it comes to having a great foundation of solid speech delivery, the number one cause of poor speech delivery is anxiety. And again, that's why it's so important. And it is perfectly normal. It is quite common for people to have speech anxiety. Most people do. After all, it is one of life's biggest fears for the majority of people. If you recall back to one of the videos that I showed you, it talks about how people fear public speaking more than death, and people would rather die than give a speech. I even have students in my on-campus classes, and they say they would rather die than give a speech. So I totally understand if you have high levels of anxiety. But the number one cause that is going to have you show up as nervous or, unsure of yourself, all of that, the number one cause is speech anxiety. We are going to move on to talk about communication apprehension. And if you don't know what communication apprehension is almost the same as anxiety. Apprehension is your level of hesitancy and being nervous. And again, we all come from different backgrounds, different walks of life. Therefore, not everyone is going to have the communication anxiety or the communication apprehension in all areas. It could just be one specific thing for you. For example, some people are terrified to deliver a speech or a presentation, but if they go out with a group of friends, even if it's a large group of friends or a large gathering and they're in a crowd, they can very easily be the life of the party and talk and extroverted and never met a stranger. But when it comes to public speaking in front of an audience, that could be a little intimidating for some people. That's not always the case, though. It can work all kinds of ways. Sometimes people are fantastic when it comes to a small group or being in front of an audience, but they get intimidated whenever they are having one-on-one conversations. Like perhaps the conversation starts to grow a little bit deeper. They could feel a little intimidated, and that alone can make them nervous, whereas all other areas they're totally fine. Or someone could be fine with everything except possibly speaking up at work. If you have a meeting for your job and you want to ask a question, how many times have you ever thought that, okay, should I say this? Maybe I shouldn't. And you have all this anxiety building because you're like, I don't know what to do. But that could be another thing. And a lot of people struggle with either one or two or even all of them. If you struggle with any of them or all of them, then I promise it is quite common. So a lot of times people tend to be hard on themselves because they have so much anxiety when it does come to public speaking. But I think talking about it and being open about it, that just helps you feel better, because you also know that other people feel what you feel. And if it's not talked about, then you kind of feel alone with those feelings, and you're like, everybody's gonna judge me, I'm the only one that feels this way, everybody else sounds great. I promise it's not the case. The majority of people are nervous to do this, but the more nervous that you are, the more likely that could lead to mistakes. You could you could drop your note cards, or you could totally skip an entire section. You could freeze up and just forget what you're going to say. There's so many variables involved that could create the presentation to be a lot worse, but it all kind of goes back to the amount of nervousness or anxiety that you have. So that's just a reminder, you're not alone. Trait apprehension. So we are going to go ahead and talk about trait apprehension. Trait apprehension is communication anxiety in a variety of different settings, but it is only under certain circumstances, and it kind of is more about the trait that you have as an individual. And I will give an example of that. I actually have a student in one of my on-campus classes. She, I don't recall what her specific role is, but she works at one of the plants in Oak Ridge, and she is accustomed to doing all kinds of meetings. She does presentations to corporate executives, and she's been doing it for years. She is just going back to school so that she can get her degree, and she wants to, hopefully move up within the company. But she does this all the time. She's done it for years, and she wants to improve those public speaking skills. She actually just got promoted to a leadership position. She said that she did not want to necessarily do it. She did not apply for it, but her supervisor actually asked her if she would apply. And she didn't believe in herself. She's essentially doing the same thing. It's the same role that she's been accustomed to, but now she's leading people and she does have additional responsibilities. It did come along with a pretty significant raise, is what she said. But that being said, she, I forgot how long she's been in the new position, but she said that she was hesitant. She had apprehension, had anxiety about moving on. But where the trait apprehension comes in is that's because she doesn't believe in herself to do this role. She doesn't believe that she has the skills and qualifications that are needed for her to be in that, but her supervisor believed that she did. And whenever you have the trait apprehension, you almost have imposter syndrome, and you're not entirely sure if you should be where you are. And that is something that people have to overcome, is the trait apprehension. Now, to add to that, there is something else called state apprehension. So the trait apprehension is if you are possessing a certain trait, but the state apprehension is if you are doing the exact same thing, but you are moved to an entirely different environment. For example, let's just say the same person, as I was giving an example of a few minutes ago, that particular person is doing the same role. She did not get promoted, but now she got a job opportunity doing the exact same thing, but for another organization. If she shows up at this new job, she doesn't know anybody. All of these people over here at her last job, she knew them. She'd been talking to them for years. They had been her coworkers for years. But now she has to adapt. Different room, different setting, different building, different people. That's going to create some anxiety. Even if it's the exact same presentation that she's done 100 times, it's still going to create anxiety because everything is new. She has to grow back into that role. So that's kind of state apprehension. Another example would be, I personally don't get nervous with public speaking. And I say that not to brag or anything, because I too was once like you guys. So don't think anything like that. It does take years, but I have been working on my skill level with public speaking for years. I go to Toastmasters. I, teach multiple classes at multiple colleges and all of those things. Like, I'm constantly working at it, and I constantly have experience. I'm constantly exposed to it. If I was to, let's just say, take 10 years off from all of public speaking, from all of teaching, and then I were to step back into the game, then I may be a little out of tune. I may have to freshen up again on my skills. You have to be consistent. But another example I like to give is, I know this woman who is a retired teacher. She just retired probably about 4 or 5 years ago. She and I were having a conversation when I first started teaching, which was about 4 years ago or so, because I was stepping into it and she was stepping out of it. She taught classes at a local high school, and then she also taught classes that were just college classes on campus. She had been doing that for years. She was totally comfortable with it. She felt great about it. One thing she said, though, was that she would sometimes have to do presentations for the faculty or for the other teachers at the high school. whenever she had to do that, despite the fact that she felt great and comfortable with her students, a high level of anxiety started to sink in for her whenever she had to talk in front of the faculty. And that's because she wasn't consistent with that. It was out of her norm. It was out of her regular habits, and it was something new. She had to prepare for it. And then the last example I want to give about that, we have talked a little bit about Toastmasters, not too involved, but just kind of a refresher. Toastmasters is a public speaking group. You go to the group and they evaluate you. They give you feedback on your speeches and all of that. But I am the vice president of Toastmasters. There is someone else who is the president, but if the president is out, then I would fill in for the vice president. This happened a few years ago, 2 years ago or so, but the president was out at the time. His name was Andrew. We have a new president now, but his name was Andrew. I have been the vice president for the past 3 years, but his name was Andrew. And him and his wife and his family, they have 2 little girls. They like to go camping a lot, and sometimes they go to different places. He had the key, but he knew he was going to be out of town the week that I had to fill in for him. So he said that he would meet me to give the key, and then we would just meet like the day before or something like that. Well, we meet every Thursday night at 6:30. So Wednesday, I messaged him and asked if he would meet me to give me the key, and he said, "You're not going to need it." We actually meet at a church, and there is I think it's like a women's Bible study that meets every Thursday, but we meet every Thursday, 6:30 to 7:30. And he was like, "There's going to be people there. You'll be totally fine. Don't worry about it." So I said, "Okay, I'll trust your word for it." Well, the next day, on Thursday, come 6:30, I get there, and we have quite a few guests. Like, we have different visitors every week, and I would say that evening we probably had 6 guests, which we do get guests on a regular basis because they find us online, but to have 6 in one night is not really normal. But whenever I get there, I see that the door is locked and we cannot get in the church and no one is in there. Whenever that happened, I had to think fast. I was in charge of these people, some of which I didn't know. Some of those people, this was their first time at Toastmasters, which means this was the ultimate impression about what things were going to be like. And if I didn't handle it well, then they may not ever come back to Toastmasters. They could have a bad experience and not want to return. I had to filter those things out, and I had to act fast. I had a group of people to lead, and I had to be under pressure to figure it out. I decided to think outside of the box, and there was a park a little bit down the road with a gazebo, and I asked everybody to make sure, "Hey, are you guys on board? Let's go to the park, to the gazebo," and everybody wanted to. We get to the park, and thankfully it was like a really pretty day in July, because otherwise, it could have been a lot worse. But we met outside in the gazebo. We always meet in the church classroom. Always. That alone was a little bit out of their comfort zone. But more discomfort starts to happen as all these people, like it was super crowded. There's picnic tables with all kinds of kids and all kinds of people. Looks like there's a few birthday parties going on. There's tons of things going on. But being outside of our normal classroom setting from the church and being in a public space, that alone is getting people out of their comfort zone. Even if it is, even if it is like the same thing that we do, the same types of speeches, it's just totally different. But you add another layer to that equation. We actually started giving our speeches, and then we started to collect an audience. All these people were just standing around. Even for more tenured Toastmasters, that was uncomfortable for them. And we had an audience that we did not normally have. So that was definitely a thing. But you just want to make sure that, like in that situation, I could have, or anyone who is in a leadership situation, sometimes if you're under high stress, you put yourself in this box and it's hard to think outside of that box. Whenever you are under pressure, you don't have all the technical cognitive skills that you would normally have because you're under pressure, you have anxiety, you're just not thinking straight. But kind of using that same story when it comes to public speaking and you giving your speech, we are not perfect. Humans in general are not perfect. There is not a single human being on this earth that is perfect. We are all going to mess up. We are all going to make mistakes. We are all going to have to figure things out. I, however, believe there is a difference between good stress and bad stress, and you also have to learn how to adapt when need be. The situation that I mentioned about Toastmasters and not having the key, that could have easily been extremely stressful for someone, but I was not stressed. I saw it as a learning opportunity. The more that things go bad and the more that things go wrong, the more that you learn how to adapt. It's like a skill. It's like a muscle that you have to practice. Just like if you go to the gym, you can't immediately go and start lifting really heavy. It takes time to build up. Kind of on that same thought process, being able to adapt when things go wrong. If someone loses their note cards, or maybe you're on your way to class and you have your note cards for your speech, they're in your hand, and then it had just rained the night before and you drop them all in a puddle, and then you don't have any note cards. Or maybe you just got a new puppy and they chewed the cord to your computer and you can't use your computer to look at something for your notes. Whatever it is, life goes wrong all the time, whether we like it or not, and unfortunately there's not a way to stop it. But you could very easily forget what you're saying or accidentally skip over a point. There's all kinds of variables. There's so many different variables. But the more that you exercise that skill, the more that you can adapt, then the better you're going to become at speaking, the more confidence that you are going to find within yourself, the more you are going to be able to show up and move comfortably from each section to each section and be able to improvise. If something goes wrong, then you are able to figure out what to do and how to move forward. It ultimately helps your public speaking skills and your communication, and also, more importantly, your leadership and your communication skills, more importantly with that specific example. So hopefully that kind of makes sense to you guys. The part of the speech delivery is, of course, the anxiety, but when you mess up, that creates more anxiety, and it is important to overcome those things so that you can just totally eliminate the anxiety, right? But that is all we have today for overcoming or for the speech delivery and how to show up for the speech delivery. The next video, you are going to see about how to overcome anxiety, and you will learn different techniques of how to overcome it. But if you have any questions about speech delivery, please feel free to reach out. I am here to help, and I hope everybody has a fantastic spring break. Have a good day.